The city woke each morning like a drumbeat, slow at first, then louder with every passing moment. Tall glass towers touched the bright West African sky, their shining windows reflecting the rising sun. Yet only a few streets away, ancient family compounds still stood strong, their clay walls warm with the memory of generations. In those courtyards, elders sat on wooden stools where their fathers and grandfathers had once sat. In this city, the old and the new walked together on the same dusty roads. Cars rushed past with the impatience of modern life. Motorbikes buzzed like restless bees between buses and taxis. But just around the corner, women balanced baskets on their heads and walked slowly toward the markets the same way their mothers had done for decades. This was a city learning how to wear two faces at once. By the time the sun climbed above the rooftops, the streets were alive. Market vendors spread colorful cloths across wooden tables. Red peppers, bright tomatoes, ripe mangoes, and golden plantains were arranged like pieces of art. The smell of roasted corn floated through the air. Fresh fruit. Sweet mango, one woman called out proudly. Nearby, a bus honked loudly as students hurried toward the university gates, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. "Move! Move!" a driver shouted from his window. But under the wide shade of an old mango tree, the elders watched the morning unfold with quiet eyes. They spoke slowly, the way people speak when they understand that time itself is listening. One old man stroked his gray beard and said softly, "The world is running faster than our feet now." Another elder chuckled gently, "Yes, but a fast river still follows the path carved by the old one." Their words floated through the warm air like proverbs carried by the wind. In this city, education had become a crown. People spoke of university degrees the way villages once spoke of warriors and chiefs. A diploma framed on a wall could open doors, command respect, and silence arguments. Parents proudly told neighbors, "My son is studying engineering. My daughter will become a lawyer." Even strangers asked each other the same question before they offered respect. "Which university did you attend?" Books had become the new measure of a person's worth. And among those who believed this most strongly was a man named Kofi. Kofi had not always worn fine suits or polished shoes. There was a time when he walked those same dusty streets with holes in his sandals and hunger in his stomach. He grew up in a small room with a leaking roof. Rain used to fall into a metal bucket placed beside his bed. His mother would say, "Study hard, my son. Books will carry you where our feet cannot." Kofi listened. He studied under dim lantern light when the electricity failed. He borrowed old textbooks from friends. Many nights he slept with his head resting on open pages. Years later, those long nights brought him what he wanted: a university degree. Then a job in a large company. Soon after came a bigger house, expensive suits, and the proud way people greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Kofi," colleagues said with respect. Each greeting fed his pride like dry wood feeding a fire. And slowly, quietly, that fire began to burn away the humility he once carried. At home lived his wife, Amina. Amina moved through the house with gentle patience. Her steps were slow now because a child was growing inside her. Neighbors often saw her sweeping the yard early in the morning, humming old songs her mother used to sing. Her smile was calm, the kind that made people feel safe. "Amina has a good heart," the women in the neighborhood often said. It was true. Amina had left school when she was still young. Her father fell sick, and someone had to help feed the family. So she began working early, selling small things in the market. But what she lacked in schooling, she carried in wisdom. When neighbors argued, they came to her. When young mothers cried, they knocked on her door. "Amina, please, talk to my daughter," one woman once begged. And Amina always listened first before she spoke. Inside her quiet voice lived patience, the kind elders say cannot be taught in classrooms. But not everyone saw that value anymore. Especially not her husband. Across the city, another life sparkled with bright lights and smooth promises. Her name was Lila. Lila walked through the university campus with confidence that turned heads. Her dresses were stylish, her laughter loud and carefree. She spoke often about dreams bigger than the city itself. "I will travel," she told her friends one afternoon as they sat outside the library. "I will see the world." Her friends admired her boldness. But Lila also enjoyed the comfort that money could bring. Expensive meals, new clothes, a quiet apartment paid for by someone who believed in her future. That someone was Kofi. To him, Lila represented everything he believed success should look like: educated, modern, polished. And slowly, the glitter of that image began to blind him to something far more valuable waiting at home. But long before Pride entered their marriage, life had looked very different. There was a time when Kofi had nothing but dreams. Back then, he lived in a small room with cracked walls and borrowed furniture. It was Amina who stood beside him. One evening many years ago, Kofi had sat with his head buried in his hands. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. Amina placed a simple meal on the table. "You can," she said softly. "A tree grows slowly, but one day it gives shade." Her words gave him strength when doubt tried to swallow his hope. During those years, Amina worked long hours in the market. She woke before sunrise to cook food she could sell: bean cakes, fried plantains, small bowls of rice. Her hands smelled of cooking oil and pepper by the end of every day. Still, when Kofi returned home with worry on his face, she smiled. "How was your study today?" she would ask. Sometimes he sighed. "Exams are expensive." Amina would quietly untie the small cloth purse hidden in her dress. Inside were coins she had saved one by one. "Take it," she said gently. "Where did you get this?" he asked once. She shrugged. The market was kind today. But the truth was harder. Some days she skipped meals just to save that money. Years passed like this. Slow sacrifices. Quiet encouragement. And eventually, Kofi crossed the bridge from struggle into success. But when wealth entered his life, gratitude slowly walked out the door. New friends surrounded him now, people with polished shoes and smooth words. They spoke about status, about appearances, about marrying women who matched their level. And those voices began to echo inside his mind. One evening, while adjusting his expensive watch, Kofi looked at Amina differently. Not as the woman who once carried his dreams, but as someone who reminded him of the poverty he worked so hard to escape. The thought crept into his mind like a shadow. She never finished school. That single thought slowly grew into embarrassment. And the man who once needed her strength began to forget the price she had paid for his success. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm: cars rushing, markets buzzing, elders watching beneath the mango tree. But deep inside one household, the seeds of pride had already been planted. And as the elders often say in many villages, a seed of pride may grow quickly, but the harvest it brings is always bitter. The evening sun rested gently over the compound, painting the clay walls with warm gold. Inside the courtyard, laughter and conversation filled the air as guests gathered around a long wooden table. Plates of rice, grilled fish, and fried plantains were passed from hand to hand. Moments like these were common in the neighborhood. Friends visited. Relatives stopped by. Stories were shared. But that night, something invisible sat among the guests, something sharp and heavy. Amina moved slowly between the tables, serving food. Her steps were careful because of the child growing inside her. Sweat rested lightly on her forehead, but her smile remained soft. "Please eat," she said kindly. "There is more if you want." One of the visitors, an older woman named Mama Saad, nodded with appreciation. "Your hands are blessed, my daughter. The food smells wonderful." Amina lowered her eyes politely. "Thank you, Mama." Kofi sat proudly at the center of the gathering, dressed in a clean shirt and expensive watch that caught the light whenever he moved his hand. His colleagues from the office sat beside him, laughing loudly at stories about work and city life. One man asked him, "Kofi, you must be doing well these days. We hear the company is preparing to promote you again." Kofi leaned back in his chair with a smile full of pride. "Hard work and education, my friend," he said. "That is the secret." Another colleague laughed. "Education truly opens doors." Just then, Amina approached the table to refill a bowl of stew. Kofi watched her for a moment. Something about the way she moved, the simple way she dressed, made a strange irritation rise inside him. One of the guests looked at Amina and asked politely, "Madam, did you also attend the university?" The question was innocent. But Kofi answered before she could speak. He chuckled loudly. "University," he repeated, shaking his head as if the idea itself was amusing. The laughter at the table slowly faded into awkward silence. "My wife," he continued. "Ah, she is not a woman of books." Amina froze for a moment, still holding the serving spoon. Kofi added with a careless grin, "She is, how should I say it, a woman of the kitchen." Some guests forced small laughs, unsure how to respond. Amina quietly placed the bowl down. Mama Saad looked uncomfortable and cleared her throat. But Kofi was not finished. "You know," he said, turning to his colleagues, "sometimes I explain simple things to her, and she still looks at me like I'm speaking a foreign language." A few men chuckled nervously. Amina lowered her eyes. She said nothing. In many African homes, silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is a shield. But silence can also hide deep wounds. Later that night, as the guests continued talking, one of Kofi's co-workers began describing a woman from their office. "You remember Miss Nola from accounting," the man said. "Very sharp mind." Kofi nodded eagerly. "Yes. That woman understands numbers like a machine." Then he glanced toward Amina, who was clearing empty plates. He smirked. "Some women grow their minds," he said loudly. "Others only grow families." The words floated across the table like poison carried by the wind. Amina's hands paused for a moment. But again, she said nothing. Inside her chest, something tightened quietly. The laughter slowly returned, but it carried discomfort now. Mama Saad leaned closer to another woman and whispered softly, "A man who mocks his own roof should not complain when rain enters his house." Across the city that same evening, bright lights shined inside a modern apartment. Lila sat comfortably on a soft couch, flipping through pages of a university textbook. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Your tuition is paid. Focus on your studies." It was from Kofi. Lila smiled. She picked up the phone and replied quickly, "Thank you. You always support me." A few minutes later, Kofi arrived carrying a bag of groceries and a small gift. "You didn't have to come tonight," Lila said playfully. "I wanted to see how my investment is doing," he replied with a proud grin. She laughed lightly. "You talk like I'm a business project." Kofi shrugged. "Education is the best investment." He looked around the apartment he was paying for. A clean kitchen. Comfortable furniture. A quiet place where no one questioned him. "You will go far," he told her. "And when you graduate, people will respect you." Lila leaned back comfortably. "They already respect you," she said. "You are successful." Those words fed his pride like sweet honey. But far away in the compound, Amina sat quietly under the dim light of the veranda. Her hands rested gently on her stomach. Inside, the baby moved slightly. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "My child, may your heart grow wiser than this world." She remembered the words her grandmother once told her. A peaceful home is built with patience, not with shouting. So she chose patience, even when her heart carried pain. The next morning, the neighborhood slowly began noticing small things. Amina walked to the market alone more often. Kofi returned home later than usual. Neighbors exchanged glances. Under the old mango tree, the elders sat once again, watching life pass by. One elder sighed quietly. "That man Kofi walks with too much pride these days." Another nodded. "A pot that boils too fast will soon crack." They had seen many stories in their long lives. They knew that arrogance often grows before a fall. Inside the compound, Amina moved slowly through the kitchen. Her back ached from pregnancy, but she continued preparing food and sweeping the floor. Her strength was quiet, not the loud strength of pride, but the patient strength of someone who believes storms do not last forever. Still, she placed a gentle hand on her stomach and whispered, "You must grow strong, little one, because new life carries both hope and fragile uncertainty." Outside, the city continued its busy rhythm. Cars rushed. Students chased degrees. People spoke proudly of education as if it were the only crown worth wearing. But hidden beneath that noise lived another truth. A truth the elders often spoke about in quiet voices. A person may fill their head with books and still leave their heart empty. And somewhere between pride and humility, between knowledge and wisdom, this story was slowly preparing its lesson. Evenings in the compound were once peaceful. The smell of cooked rice, roasted fish, and pepper soup would travel through the warm air while neighbors and relatives gathered to share food and stories. In many African homes, the dinner table is more than a place to eat, it is where respect is served along with a meal. But slowly, something began to change in Kofi's house. One night, several guests sat around the long wooden table in the courtyard. The lantern hanging from the roof gave off a soft yellow light. Laughter moved easily from one side of the table to the other. Amina carried a bowl of stew carefully in both hands. Her movements were slower now because of her pregnancy, but she still served each guest with kindness. "Please take more," she said gently. One of Kofi's colleagues smiled. "Your wife is very hard-working." Kofi leaned back in his chair, a small smirk forming on his lips. "Yes, hard-working," he said slowly, "because school was never her strength." "Yes, hard-working," he said slowly, "because school was never her strength." A few people laughed lightly, thinking it was only a joke. Amina paused for a moment, but she continued serving the food. Another guest asked politely, "Madam, did you ever think about going back to school?" Before Amina could answer, Kofi chuckled again. "My friend," he said, waving his hand dismissively, "my wife and school are like oil and water. They simply do not mix." The laughter this time was louder. Amina's smile stayed on her face, but her eyes lowered quietly. Mama Saad, an elderly woman sitting near the end of the table, frowned slightly. She had lived long enough to recognize when laughter carried cruelty. Later in the evening, as people continued eating, Amina joined the conversation for a moment. "I think the city is growing too fast," she said softly. "The roads are becoming very busy." Kofi immediately interrupted. "Becoming very busy," he repeated with a laugh. "Amina, the correct way is becoming busier." Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Amina nodded politely. "Yes, busier." But Kofi was not finished. "You see," he said proudly to his colleagues, "this is what happens when someone doesn't attend proper schools. Simple grammar becomes a mountain." One man coughed awkwardly. Another guest looked down at his plate. Mama Saad shook her head slowly and whispered under her breath, "A tongue can wound deeper than a spear." But Kofi continued enjoying the moment. Later, as the conversation turned toward work and business, one of Kofi's co-workers asked Amina a simple question. "So, madam, what do you think about education for women?" Amina answered carefully, "I think learning is good for everyone. Even small knowledge can help a person." Kofi burst out laughing. "Small knowledge," he repeated loudly. "You see why I call her simple-minded?" The word hung in the air like smoke. "Simple-minded," he repeated again, smiling as if he had said something clever. Some of his colleagues forced small laughs, but many avoided Amina's eyes. Amina quietly stood up and carried the empty plates toward the kitchen. In African homes, dignity sometimes speaks through silence. But silence does not erase pain. That night, when the guests had gone and the compound grew quiet, Amina finished washing the dishes. The house slept peacefully. Only the soft chirping of night insects filled the air. She stepped outside and sat on the small wooden bench near the doorway. The moon hung high above the rooftops. Her hand rested gently on her stomach. Inside her chest, the weight of the evening finally broke free. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. But she wiped them quickly. "My child," she whispered softly, "may your life be kinder than these words." In many villages, elders say a woman's tears are like hidden rivers. People may not see them, but they shape the land over time. Across the city, under bright electric lights, another story was unfolding. Lila sat at a restaurant table with Kofi, smiling as a waiter placed expensive food before them. "You always choose the best places," she said sweetly. Kofi smiled proudly. "A man must enjoy the fruits of his success." Lila leaned forward slightly. "You are different from other men," she told him. "You are intelligent, successful." Her voice carried admiration like warm honey. Those words made Kofi sit a little taller. "I worked very hard to reach where I am," he said. "And it shows," she replied softly. After dinner, he handed her an envelope. Lila opened it slowly. Inside was a receipt from the university, her full tuition paid. Her eyes widened with excitement. "You paid everything?" Kofi nodded calmly. "Focus on your studies." Lila looked at him with admiration. "You believe in my future?" Kofi leaned back proudly. "Yes. Education builds powerful people." Later that night, he also paid the rent for her apartment and bought her new books. Money flowed easily from his pocket. Money that once helped build his home was now building another life. Inside his mind, Kofi believed he was creating something perfect. An educated woman. A polished partner. Someone who matched the image of success he wanted the world to see. Meanwhile, Lila continued feeding the fire of his pride. "You are the smartest man I know," she often told him. "You deserve someone who understands your world." Each compliment made his heart swell like a drum beaten louder and louder. The dinners grew more expensive. The gifts became more generous. Secret meetings became normal. In his mind, this hidden life represented progress, luxury, status. But in many African stories, when a man begins to walk two paths at once, the ground beneath his feet slowly becomes unstable. Because every secret carries its own shadow. And one day, that shadow always steps into the light. The rooster had not yet crowed when the woman rose from her sleeping mat. The sky outside was still dark, and the air carried the cool breath of dawn. Slowly, she placed a hand over her round belly. "Little one," she whispered softly, "the day is already waiting for us." Her body was heavy with pregnancy, but her spirit refused to rest. She moved through the small house quietly, lighting the cooking fire and sweeping the floor with a palm broom. The smell of wood smoke filled the room as she prepared porridge. Though her heart still carried the wounds of humiliation, her hands never forgot their duties. She cooked, washed, and cleaned as if peace still lived inside the walls of her home. Sometimes she paused, holding her back as the child shifted inside her. "Be patient, my child," she murmured with a gentle smile. "Your mother is still learning how to carry both pain and hope." As the sun climbed into the sky, women from nearby houses often stopped by her doorway. One afternoon, a young neighbor named Amina sat beside her on a wooden stool. Amina's eyes were red from crying. "My husband says I am useless," Amina said, her voice trembling. "No matter what I do, he finds fault." The pregnant woman listened quietly. She did not rush to speak. In the village, people believed that wise words should arrive slowly, like rain that nourishes dry land. Finally, she placed a hand on Amina's shoulder. "Listen carefully," she said softly. "A tree does not become strong because someone praises it. It becomes strong because its roots hold firmly in the soil." Amina wiped her tears. "You mean I should not let his words break me?" The woman nodded gently. "Your value does not live in his anger. It lives inside your heart." Soon, other women began coming to her when life became heavy. Some arrived carrying babies on their backs. Others came with tired eyes and troubled spirits. A young mother once sat beside her, rocking a crying child. "I feel like I am drowning," the mother confessed. "The work never ends." The woman rocked the baby gently and smiled. "A mother's road is long," she said. "But remember this, when one woman grows tired, another woman must hold her hand." Her words were simple, yet they settled in people's hearts like seeds. Not far from the village market stood a small community learning center. Its walls were plain, and the roof was made of rusted metal sheets. Still, laughter and hope often lived inside those rooms. The pregnant woman volunteered there whenever she could. She helped arrange books, cleaned tables, and welcomed mothers who came to learn simple reading and writing. One afternoon, a teacher watched her comfort a nervous woman who was afraid to hold a pencil. "You are not stupid," the pregnant woman told the woman kindly. "A mind is like a field. Sometimes it simply waits for the right season to grow." The teacher smiled quietly. "Your kindness teaches more than our lessons," he said. Meanwhile, beneath the wide shade of the old mango tree, the village elders often gathered. Their voices carried the slow rhythm of ancient wisdom. One elder tapped his walking stick on the ground. "Children today chase knowledge the way hunters chase animals," he said. "But they forget something important." A younger man asked, "What do they forget, Baba?" The old man lifted his eyes toward the sky. "They forget that knowledge without humility is like a drum with a torn skin. It makes noise but carries no music." Another elder nodded. "There is an old saying," he added. "A person may read many books and still know nothing." The words traveled through the village like a quiet wind. Some people began noticing the gentle strength of the pregnant woman who helped others without asking for praise. "She carries the wisdom of our grandmothers," one woman whispered. Yet the woman herself never thought of it that way. Inside the learning center one quiet evening, she sat alone with a notebook in front of her. The room was empty, and the fading sunlight entered through the window. Slowly, she picked up a pencil. Her hands trembled. "I want to learn too," she whispered to herself. No one had asked her to do it. No one expected it. But something inside her heart had awakened. Carefully, she began tracing letters on the paper. A, B, C. The shapes looked strange at first, but each one felt like a small victory. When she finally managed to write her own name, she stared at the page for a long moment. Tears filled her eyes. "I did it," she whispered. A young teacher who had returned to collect some books saw the paper. His eyes widened. "You are learning." She nodded shyly. "I want my child to see that learning never has a late season." The teacher smiled with deep respect. "Many students come here," he said, "but few carry courage the way you do." As the days passed, the letters became clearer, and her confidence slowly returned. The woman who had once suffered in silence was beginning to change. Inside her heart, a quiet flame had begun to grow. And like many small flames in the world, it was slowly preparing to become a light. The office building towered over the city streets like a monument to ambition. Each promotion, each new pay raise, became a badge Kofi wore proudly. In his mind, every number on a paycheck and every title in a report was proof that he had risen above the ordinary, above the dusty roads and the small market stalls where he had once struggled. "Another promotion," he told a colleague with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Now I truly belong among those who understand success." He thought of himself as untouchable, as if the world itself bowed to his intellect and drive. The very streets that had once carried him on tired feet through long walks to school, and the hands that had once fed him from market stalls, were now distant memories. One afternoon, Mama Saad, one of the village elders, approached him during a community gathering under the old mango tree. Her hair was white as the clouds above, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "Kofi," she said quietly, "a man who disrespects the woman who holds his home invites misfortune. The spirits do not look kindly upon such arrogance." Kofi laughed softly, waving a hand dismissively. "Mama Saad, your wisdom is from another time. I have worked hard. I have earned my place." The elder's eyes did not soften. Wealth and knowledge without humility are like rivers without water. They dry up where they matter most. Kofi turned away, convinced that the old words were empty. The pride in his chest drowned the echo of ancient counsel. Meanwhile, the marketplace hummed with a different rhythm. Women at the stalls whispered as they arranged yams and tomatoes, glancing toward Kofi's compound. "Have you seen him with that university girl again?" one whispered, pulling her scarf tighter. "Every evening," another said. "And yet he still comes to church looking as if he is the most honorable man in town." Questions like these drifted through the neighborhood like smoke, unnoticed by Kofi but felt deeply by those around him. Even respect could not mask the sense that something was amiss. At home, Amina woke before dawn as always. Her hands moved over the bowls and brooms with practiced care, but inside her chest, her heart carried a heaviness that no chore could sweep away. "Another day," she whispered to her unborn child, pressing a hand gently to her belly. "We will walk this path together." The hurt of humiliation lingered in her mind. Every careless word, every comparison to the women in Kofi's offices, every public joke about her lack of schooling had left invisible scars. She drew a deep breath and reminded herself of patience, of dignity, of strength born quietly in silence. Her gaze drifted to the small crib she had prepared. imagining the life of a child born into a household where respect seemed to slip further away each day. Yet even as Kofi strode through his world of appointments, gifts, and accolades, he did not notice the subtle transformation taking place beneath his own roof. Amina's quiet resilience, her gentle acts for neighbors, and the way the community slowly looked to her for guidance were threads of strength weaving around him unseen. Like seeds sown beneath rich, dark soil, the power of patience, wisdom, and quiet determination had begun to grow. Kofi's pride blinded him to it now, but the ground itself was preparing for a harvest he could not yet imagine. And so, the city continued its hum, the markets buzzed, and the elders whispered under the mango tree. Unseen, unstoppable, a change was rising, a truth that one day would shine through the arrogance and reveal the measure of true character. The city buzzed with life, but today it seemed different. The streets were lined with banners, bright fabrics fluttering like birds in the morning wind. The scent of roasted maize and fresh bread mingled with the sharp tang of drums echoing from the central square. Elders, dressed in flowing robes, gathered beneath the shade of ancient trees, their eyes glimmering with quiet pride. Young students in neat uniforms ran through the crowds, their laughter like a river of hope, weaving between the feet of market vendors and families who came to celebrate knowledge, leadership, and community progress. From the center of the square, storytellers recounted tales of courage and wisdom, their voices carrying across the crowd. Children sat wide-eyed on the ground, while mothers and fathers nodded at the lessons woven into the words. Music pulsed through the streets, drums, bells, and clapping hands, turning the city into a tapestry of sound and color. Bright fabrics swirled with every movement, and the aroma of spices reminded everyone that this was not just a festival of learning, but of life itself. At the heart of the celebration, the small community learning center stood in quiet contrast to the grandeur of the stage. Yet today, it held a place of honor. Leaders announced that one of its most inspiring stories would be shared, a tale of a mother who had returned to learning after years of sacrifice, proving that courage could blossom even in the most overlooked corners. When the wife's name was called, murmurs spread through the crowd. She adjusted the hem of her simple dress and rose slowly, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. The weight of the community's gaze did not falter her steps. She walked with dignity, each footfall a quiet declaration. Strength does not always wear silk or carry a diploma, sometimes it walks in silence, nurtured in patience. The storyteller's voice carried over the square. "This is Amina," he said. "A woman who, despite her burdens, chose to learn again. She fed her family, guided her neighbors, and opened her heart to knowledge, even while carrying new life inside her." The crowd fell into a hush, then erupted into soft applause that grew into a wave of hands clapping, feet stomping, and voices shouting encouragement. It was the kind of applause that carried more than recognition. It carried the weight of justice, of truth, of long-overdue honor. Kofi pushed through the crowd, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel, his chest puffed with pride. He had arrived expecting to celebrate the accomplishments of his young mistress, to see her honored for the university she attended at his expense. He smiled, imagining the approval he would receive for her progress. Then he froze. The crowd's attention was not on the woman he had funded, but on Amina, his wife. She stood tall, her eyes calm and steady, a gentle smile brushing her lips as elders nodded in respect. The university girl was absent from the center stage. His heart skipped a beat, and the world around him seemed to blur. Confusion clouded his sharp features. Murmurs of admiration flowed through the audience, voices calling out praises for her courage, patience, and determination. For the first time, Kofi felt the uncomfortable stirrings of doubt. The woman he had mocked, called uneducated before friends and family, now stood as a living testament to perseverance and quiet wisdom. The applause was no longer a sound of celebration for status. It was a mirror held up to him, reflecting a truth he had long ignored. A cold realization crept over him. The pride that had carried him so confidently through life began to crack, revealing the arrogance beneath. His chest tightened, and he took a step back. The eyes that once held certainty now searched for an explanation, but the answer was already clear. The woman he had belittled had risen, and he had been blind to her strength. And in that moment, beneath the drums, the colors, and the clapping hands, the seeds of justice began to take root. The quiet strength of patience, humility, and wisdom had stepped into the light, and nothing could obscure it. The applause continued to roll across the courtyard, but it was not the sound of titles or certificates being honored, it was deeper. Mothers clapped, students whistled, and elders nodded, their eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "This woman," an elder said, voice strong and sure, "has lifted others while carrying her own burdens. Her hands fed the hungry, her words healed the weary, her patience taught the children that courage is not measured in diplomas." The crowd murmured agreement. They did not speak of her lack of a university degree. Instead, they celebrated the power of character, the resilience of spirit, and the courage it takes to remain humble while the world tests you. Children pointed at her, wide-eyed. Women whispered to one another, "See how she stands, even while carrying life within her." True wisdom is not always written in books. From the shade of a mango tree, the elders leaned forward, their voices carrying like the wind through the city streets. "Remember," one began, "knowledge lives not only in ink and paper. It thrives in the heart that loves without reward, in the hands that lift without seeking praise, and in the spirit that sacrifices for others." Another added, "A life built on humility, on service, on patience, this is a life worth honoring." The lesson unfolded naturally before everyone. It was no longer just an award ceremony. It was a mirror reflecting the values that truly mattered. Applause and nods of recognition filled the air. Even the students who had rushed past dusty streets for exams felt the weight of the teaching. Strength, loyalty, and compassion matter more than letters after a name. Nearby, whispers began to rise. The mistress, dressed in silks and polished shoes, stood beside the husband. Guests leaned closer, eyes flicking between her and the man at her side. "Isn't she the one he keeps at the university?" a woman asked quietly. "Yes, and yet she is still young, and he is married," another replied. The shine of her expensive jewelry and sleek appearance began to dim under the sharp gaze of the crowd. What had once seemed alluring now looked out of place. She fidgeted slightly, adjusting the folds of her skirt, and her confident smile faltered. The quiet questioning, the sideways glances, it was as if the community could see the truth behind her carefully maintained mask. The husband felt it first as a prickling unease, then as a wave of cold realization. He stood stiff, eyes darting from the applause for his wife to the whispers surrounding his mistress. For the first time, he felt the weight of the choices he had made. The woman he had mocked, called uneducated before neighbors, friends, and family, was now the center of honor. And the person he had tried to elevate with money and attention, his mistress, was losing the power she once held in his eyes. He swallowed hard, the truth pressing against him like the midday sun. Pride, wealth, status, all these could not mask the loyalty and sacrifice he had ignored. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, the elders, the mothers, the children, and realized that respect was earned in quiet courage, not flaunted in luxury. "This is the woman I should have cherished," he murmured under his breath, voice barely audible. "I traded loyalty for appearances, love for status, and I see now the cost." The community celebration had done more than honor one mother. It had revealed a mirror of truth. The husband could no longer hide behind diplomas or money. He had been exposed to the wisdom of the people, the very wisdom he had once dismissed. And in that moment, he knew his greatest mistake had been overlooking the strength that walked quietly beside him every day. The clapping of hands and the low hum of drums faded as the ceremony ended, but the echo of truth lingered. The husband stood frozen, eyes fixed on his wife. For the first time, his heart truly saw her pain, the nights she had cried silently, the meal she had prepared while hiding sorrow, the words he had thrown like knives. Each smile she once gave him now carried the weight of all he had dismissed. I never understood," he whispered, voice trembling, "how much you suffered." Pride, once a tall fortress around him, began to crumble. He remembered the market days when she had sold yams and cassava, supporting his dreams while he studied. He recalled the sacrifices she made without complaint, the gentle hands that held him through failure. Now, as the community's eyes praised her courage, shame pressed down on him like the midday sun. His arrogance bent under the weight of his own wrongs. A bitter truth revealed itself in the quiet of his soul. Strength had grown where he had only seen weakness. While he chased titles, prestige, and applause for himself, his wife quietly nurtured wisdom, patience, and resilience, the kind of strength no university degree could teach. He had built his ego on paper, but she had built a legacy in the hearts of people. As the crowd dispersed, the streets buzzed with whispers. The story of her courage traveled through market stalls, across dusty roads, and into neighboring compounds. People began to see him differently. The man who once commanded respect through status now moved through a city that watched him with quiet judgment. The husband felt the first sting of isolation, the culture's reminder that character speaks louder than wealth or education. The mistress, once glittering beside him, shifted uneasily. The scrutiny of neighbors and elders made her prideful mask waver. Slowly, she pulled back, realizing that the community now saw their relationship for what it was, an alliance built on secrecy and convenience, not honor. The light of shame cast long shadows, and she sought to protect herself before the city judged her fully. Meanwhile, his wife walked home with a different kind of triumph. Once mocked, now she carried herself with quiet respect. Mothers and neighbors began to seek her out, drawn by the example she had set. Her voice, soft but unwavering, shared the lessons of patience, courage, and dignity. Women who had thought it too late for learning now found hope in her story. Inside her womb, life stirred, a reminder that the future could be different. This unborn child would grow in a home where knowledge and humility could coexist, nurtured by a mother whose quiet perseverance had transformed not just her own life but the hearts of the community. The city, once blind to her worth, now watched with reverence, learning that true strength is often hidden, growing quietly, until the day it rises into the light. The house was quiet, heavy with the weight of absence. The husband sat alone, his hands folded over his knees, eyes staring at nothing. In the stillness, the echo of his own words returned like a stubborn wind. Uneducated, simple-minded, each insult, each cruel joke he once threw at her, rang sharper now than it had in the moment. He could see her face, her eyes lowering, her silence carrying the sharpest pain he had ever caused. "How blind I was," he murmured, voice tight with regret. The silence around him pressed down, deeper than any reprimand. Pride had built walls around him, separating him from the laughter, the respect, and the warmth he once enjoyed in the community. Now, without applause or admiration, he understood that arrogance was a burden heavier than any he had carried as a poor boy striving to rise. The quiet was louder than any crowd he had commanded. A soft knock at the door brought the elders inside. Their presence was steady, measured, like the wisdom that had carried the village through generations. One spoke, voice calm but firm. "A man who holds knowledge without humility is like a tree without roots. Storms will topple him. Do not forget the soil that nourished you, son." The words sank deep, sharper than any wealth or diploma. The first step toward repair was small, almost invisible. He began quietly assisting at the learning center, stacking chairs, helping with supplies, listening to the women as they learned. His hands that once counted money for status now carried paper, pencils, and encouragement. "Slowly," he admitted, aloud in front of a few neighbors and teachers, "the strength I mocked, it is what has held our family together all these years." She did not rush toward him, nor did she offer the balm of instant forgiveness. Instead, she focused on her child, the life growing inside her, and on the purpose she had discovered in helping others reclaim their voices. Every letter taught at the learning center became a testament to patience, to resilience, to dignity that cannot be hurried. The elders gathered once more beneath the shade of the mango tree, repeating their teachings to the younger generation. "True wisdom," they said, "cannot be measured by certificates alone. Those who chase status while forgetting loyalty pay the price of lost respect. Honor begins at home. A family dishonored is a society that cannot respect its own." Their words echoed across the village, carried by wind and memory alike. Inside the small classroom, mothers traced their fingers across lines of ink, learning to write their names for the very first time. Each stroke was a step toward dignity, each careful letter a victory. In the quiet of her belly, her unborn child shifted gently, carrying hope for a generation that would balance knowledge with humility. And in that quiet moment, the truth settled like morning dew. Sometimes, the one called uneducated is the one who understands life the most. The lesson endured, whispered by elders, felt by neighbors, and remembered in hearts that had learned the value of patience, courage, and quiet wisdom.